Hello, my name is Olivia. I want to tell you about my journey, about how I improved my English fast. Not in years, not even in many months, but in a way that felt almost miraculous to me. A way that transformed not just my language skills, but my entire life. I know what you're thinking. You've probably heard 100 stories like this before. You've seen the ads, the promises, the secret methods that never quite deliver. I was skeptical too, but I'm here to tell you that it's possible, and I'm going to share exactly how I did it. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let me take you back to where it all began. Chapter 1. The Struggle. I'll never forget the day I realized I had a serious problem with English. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was sitting in a conference room at my new job in downtown Seattle. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and I could smell the burnt coffee from the break room. I'd been working at this marketing firm for exactly 2 weeks, and I thought I was doing okay. Sure, I was nervous, but I figured everyone felt that way at a new job. Then my manager, Rebecca, turned to me during our team meeting and said, "Olivia, why don't you walk us through your analysis of the campaign metrics?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I'd prepared for this. I'd spent hours the night before going over the numbers, making sure I understood every detail. But as I opened my mouth to speak, the words came out all wrong. I stumbled over phrases, mixed up my verb tenses, and worst of all, I could see the confused expressions on my colleagues' faces. The campaign? It was performed. It performed. The numbers are showing that we have gotten good results in the demographic of young people. No, wait, with young people. I felt my face burning. My hands were shaking as I held the printout of my analysis. Rebecca smiled kindly and said, "Maybe you can email us the details after the meeting?" I nodded, unable to speak anymore. That afternoon, I sat in my tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill, staring at my laptop screen through tears. I'd come to the United States 3 years ago with such high hopes. I'd studied English in school back home. I'd passed all the required tests, and I'd even taken online courses. But here, in the real world, I felt like I was constantly falling short. The problem wasn't just my job. It was everywhere. When I went to the grocery store, I struggled to ask the clerk where to find items. When I tried to make friends at the gym, I couldn't keep up with casual conversations. When I called customer service about my internet bill, I had to ask them to repeat things over and over until they clearly became frustrated with me. I felt isolated. I felt stupid. And I felt like I was wasting the opportunity I'd worked so hard to get. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let this defeat me. I was going to figure out how to improve my English. And I was going to do it fast. I just had no idea where to start. Chapter 2. The research phase. I threw myself into research like it was my full-time job. Every evening after work, I'd come home, change into my comfortable clothes, and spend hours on my laptop searching for answers. I joined forums, I watched YouTube videos, I read blog posts by language experts. I even bought 3 different books on English learning from the bookstore on Pine Street. The problem was, everyone seemed to have different advice. Some people swore by grammar exercises. "You need to understand the rules," they said. So I bought workbooks and spent hours filling in blanks and correcting sentences. But when I went to work the next day, I still couldn't speak naturally. Others insisted that watching TV shows and movies was the key. Immerse yourself in the language, they said. So I started watching sitcoms and dramas every night. I'd watch with subtitles, pause to look up words, and try to repeat the dialogue. But the characters spoke so fast, used so much slang, and their jokes went completely over my head. Then there were the people who recommended apps. I downloaded what felt like every language learning app available. I did my daily lessons on the bus to work, during my lunch break, and before bed. The gamification was fun at first, collecting points, maintaining streaks, unlocking new levels. But after a few weeks, I realized I was just translating words in my head, not actually thinking in English. One Saturday afternoon in April, I was at a coffee shop in Fremont, surrounded by my books, my notes, and my frustration. I'd been studying for over a month, and while I'd certainly learned some new vocabulary and grammar rules, I didn't feel like I was actually improving where it mattered, in real conversations. That's when I overheard two people talking at the next table. I'm telling you, the way I finally got fluent in Spanish was by just forcing myself to use it constantly. A guy with a beard was saying to his friend, not studying it, using it. Like, actually speaking it for real purposes, not just practice. His friend nodded. Yeah, that's basically what my cousin did with her English. She said the turning point was when she stopped trying to translate everything in her head and just started thinking in English. I tried not to obviously eavesdrop, but I was hanging on every word. But how do you make that switch? The friend asked. The bearded guy shrugged. I think it's about putting yourself in situations where you have no choice. Like, I moved to Mexico for 3 months and barely spoke English at all. It was sink or swim, you know? I couldn't move to another country. I was already in one, trying to make it work. But the conversation stuck with me. Maybe I was approaching this all wrong. Maybe I needed to stop studying English and start living in English. But how? Chapter 3. The method takes shape. The next week, I started experimenting. Instead of doing grammar exercises when I got home from work, I decided to challenge myself differently. I would speak only English to myself for 1 full hour. I narrated everything I was doing out loud. Now I'm opening the refrigerator. I'm looking for something to make for dinner. I see some chicken breast, some bell peppers, and half an onion. I think I'll make stir-fry. First, I need to cut the vegetables. It felt ridiculous at first. I was alone in my apartment talking to myself like a crazy person. But something interesting happened. After about 15 minutes, I stopped thinking in my native language and translating. The English words started coming more naturally. I kept this up every single day. I also started changing my phone and computer settings to English, not just the language, but also my voice assistant. Instead of typing questions into Google, I started asking Siri everything out loud. Hey Siri, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? Hey Siri, set a timer for 20 minutes. Hey Siri, how do you spell necessary? At first, Siri misunderstood me constantly. But instead of getting frustrated, I used it as feedback. If Siri couldn't understand me, I needed to work on my pronunciation. I'd repeat the question, adjusting my accent and enunciation until Siri got it right. Then I tackled the job situation. I was terrified of speaking up in meetings after that first disaster, but I knew I had to push myself. So I made a rule. I had to contribute at least one comment or question in every meeting, no matter how scared I felt. I started small. In my next team meeting, I simply said, "I agree with that approach." My voice shook, but I said it. The following week, I asked a clarifying question. Could you explain what you mean by conversion optimization? The week after that, I shared a brief observation about our competitors' social media strategy. Each time was terrifying. Each time I was convinced I'd say something stupid or wrong, but each time people responded normally. They didn't laugh at me. They didn't look confused. They just engaged with what I said. Rebecca, my manager, even pulled me aside after one meeting. "I've noticed you've been participating more." "That's great, Olivia. I want to hear your ideas. You have valuable perspectives." I felt a small surge of confidence. Chapter 4. The Social Experiment by May. I was ready to take things further. The hardest part about being in a new country wasn't just the language, it was the loneliness. I'd been so focused on work and studying that I hadn't really made any friends. I'd tried once or twice, but the language barrier made me feel so awkward that I usually just kept to myself. But I realized that if I wanted to truly improve my English, I needed to have conversations with native speakers regularly. Real conversations, not just transactional exchanges at stores or brief chats with coworkers. So I did something that scared me more than anything. I joined a local book club. I found it on Meetup, a group that met every other Thursday at a bookstore in Ballard. They were reading contemporary fiction, and the next book on their list was one I'd actually heard of, Where the Crawdads Sing. I bought the book that weekend and spent the next 2 weeks reading it slowly, looking up words I didn't know and taking notes. Not just on the plot, but on phrases and expressions that the characters used. The way people said things in casual conversation. The night of my first book club meeting, I almost didn't go. I stood outside the bookstore for 5 full minutes, my hands sweating, my heart pounding, thinking of every excuse to turn around and go home. But I didn't. I pushed open the door and walked in. There were about 12 people sitting in a circle in the back of the store. Everyone was holding copies of the book, chatting and laughing. I felt like an outsider immediately, but then a woman with bright red hair waved me over. "Hey, are you here for book club?" "I'm Jennifer. Is this your first time?" "Yes," I managed. "I'm Olivia. Welcome. Grab a chair. We're just waiting for a few more people, and then we'll get started." I sat down, clutching my heavily annotated copy of the book. When the discussion started, I mostly listened. The group talked about themes and character motivations and symbolism. I understood probably 75% of what they were saying, which was better than I'd expected. Then Jennifer turned to me. "Olivia, you've been quiet. What did you think of the book?" My mouth went dry. Everyone was looking at me. "I really liked it," I started. "The main character, Kaya, she reminded me of." How do I say this? Someone who is alone but strong? She learns to live by herself, and it's sad, but also she becomes very capable. I braced myself for judgment, for confused looks. Instead, someone across the circle nodded enthusiastically. Yes, exactly. She's isolated, but that isolation also gives her a kind of freedom and self-reliance. And just like that, I was part of the conversation. I didn't say much more that night, but I didn't need to. I'd broken the ice. I'd proven to myself that I could participate in a social setting in English. After the meeting, Jennifer asked if I wanted to get coffee with her and another member, Sarah. We went to a cafe next door and talked for another hour. They asked me about my background, my job, my life in Seattle. I stumbled over words sometimes, but they were patient. They asked clarifying questions without making me feel stupid. When I got home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Genuine happiness. Chapter 5. The immersion intensifies over the next few weeks. I built on this momentum. I started saying yes to more things. When a coworker invited me to her birthday party, I went, even though I knew I'd be the only non-native English speaker there. When I saw a flyer for a volunteer opportunity at a local animal shelter, I signed up, even though I'd have to communicate with other volunteers and answer phones. Each experience pushed me out of my comfort zone, and each time, my English improved. But I also realized I needed to work on specific weak points. My pronunciation was still a major issue. I'd say words that I thought were correct, but people would look confused. I'd ask for directions to Pike's Place Market, and the person would say, "Oh, you mean Pike Place?" I'd talk about my schedule, pronouncing it like schedule the British way, and people would gently correct me. "You mean your schedule?" So I tackled pronunciation systematically. I started using YouTube to watch pronunciation tutorials specifically for American English. I learned about the American R sound, which was so different from how I'd been taught. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, watching how my mouth moved. I also discovered podcasts, not language learning podcasts, but regular podcasts for native speakers. I started with ones about topics I was interested in: true crime, psychology, personal development. I'd listen during my commute while cooking dinner, while doing laundry. But I didn't just listen passively. I shadowed. Shadowing was a technique I'd read about where you listen to audio and immediately repeat what you hear, trying to match the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation exactly. It felt weird at first, like I was a parrot, but it was incredibly effective. I'd play a podcast, pause it after each sentence, and repeat it out loud. Then I'd play it again, this time trying to say it simultaneously with the speaker. My neighbors probably thought I was losing my mind, but I didn't care. After a few weeks of this, something clicked. I started noticing patterns in how Americans spoke. The way they reduced certain words in casual speech, going to became gonna, want to became wanna, don't, know became dunno. The way they used stress and intonation to convey meaning, asking a question by raising the pitch at the end, or emphasizing certain words to show what was important. I started mimicking these patterns in my own speech. Chapter 6. The breakthrough June arrived, and with it came my 3-month performance review at work. I was nervous. Those first few weeks had been rough, and even though I'd improved, I wasn't sure if it was enough. Rebecca and I sat in her office, the Seattle skyline visible through the window behind her. She had her laptop open with my evaluation pulled up. "So, Olivia," she began, "I want to start by saying that your growth over the past 3 months has been impressive." I blinked, surprised. "When you first started, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if it was going to work out. Not because you weren't smart or capable, you clearly are, but because the communication challenges were significant. I worried about how you'd function in a role that requires so much collaboration." My heart sank. Here it came. The but. "But," Rebecca continued, "you've proven me completely wrong. In the past month especially, I've seen a dramatic improvement. You're speaking up in meetings with confidence. Your written communication has become clearer and more professional. Your presentations last week on the social media analytics were excellent, clear, concise, and persuasive." I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "More than that," Rebecca said, "your coworkers have noticed. Jake mentioned that you've been really helpful in brainstorming sessions. Maria said you gave her great feedback on her campaign proposal. You're becoming a real asset to the team." I managed to say, "Thank you. I've been working really hard on it." "I can tell," Rebecca smiled. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. I'm putting you down for a performance bonus, and I want to talk about taking on more responsibilities in the coming quarter." I walked out of that meeting feeling like I was floating. But the real breakthrough came a few days later. I was at book club, my third meeting, and we were discussing a novel about immigration and identity. The conversation had become pretty deep, with people sharing personal stories about feeling like outsiders or struggling with their sense of belonging. Before I could think too much about it, I started talking. "This book made me think about my own experience," I said. "When I first came to the United States, I thought the hardest part would be practical things, finding a job, finding an apartment. But actually, the hardest part was feeling like I couldn't fully express myself. In my native language, I'm articulate. I can be funny, I can be thoughtful, I can debate ideas. But in English, especially at first, I felt like I became this simpler version of myself. Like I lost part of my personality." I paused, worried I'd said too much or gotten too personal. But everyone was nodding. A few people murmured in agreement. Jennifer said, "I felt exactly that way when I lived in Japan for 2 years. Like I was suddenly boring because I could only express basic thoughts." Someone else added, "My mom experienced that when she immigrated from Poland. She says even now, 30 years later, she sometimes feels like she can't be as witty in English as she was in Polish." We talked for another hour, and I was right there with them, fully participating, sharing my thoughts and responding to theirs. At some point, I realized I hadn't translated anything in my head for the entire conversation. I'd been thinking in English. That was the moment I knew. I'd done it. I'd actually genuinely improved my English. Chapter 7. The refinement, but I didn't stop there. One of the most important lessons I learned was that improving a language isn't a destination. It's a journey. There's always more to learn, always ways to refine and polish your skills. In July, I focused on vocabulary expansion, but not in the way I'd done before. Instead of memorizing random word lists, I paid attention to context. When I encountered a new word or phrase, I didn't just look up its definition. I looked up example sentences. I noticed how native speakers used it, and then I made a point to use it myself within the next day or two. I also started reading more ambitiously. I'd been sticking to contemporary fiction with straightforward prose, but I pushed myself to read more challenging material. Literary fiction, long-form journalism, even some nonfiction about topics I wanted to learn about. I kept a notebook where I'd write down interesting phrases or expressions. Not just individual words, but the way people put words together. Things like, I'm inclined to think, that's beside the point, let's circle back to that. I'm on the fence about. It's a bit of a gray area. These weren't phrases I could find in a textbook, but they were everywhere in real conversation. I also worked on my writing. At work, I started volunteering to draft client emails and internal memos. I'd write them carefully, then ask Rebecca or a colleague to review them before sending. The feedback was invaluable. I learned which phrases were too formal, which were too casual, and how to strike the right tone for different audiences. In August, I challenged myself even further. I signed up for an improv comedy class. Yes, improv comedy. In my second language, it was absolutely terrifying. Improv requires you to think on your feet, to respond quickly without planning, to play with language and humor. Everything I struggled with. But it was also one of the best decisions I made. In improv, you can't overthink. You can't translate in your head. You have to react instinctively, and that forced me to truly internalize English rather than just processing it intellectually. Plus, the class was supportive and fun. Everyone was there to be silly and take risks. If I said something awkwardly or didn't understand a reference, people just rolled with it. And slowly, I started to understand American humor better. The sarcasm, the self-deprecation, the cultural references. By the end of the 8-week class, I could actually make people laugh in English. Not always, and not with sophisticated wit, but I could at least hold my own. Chapter 8. The Unexpected Rewards as my English improved. Other areas of my life transformed too. At work, I got promoted to a senior marketing specialist position. Rebecca told me that part of the reason was my excellent communication skills and ability to collaborate across teams. 6 months earlier, communication had been my biggest weakness. Now it was cited as one of my strengths. I made real friends. Jennifer from book club became one of my closest friends in Seattle. We'd get brunch together on weekends, go hiking in the Cascades, and have long conversations about everything from relationships to philosophy. Sarah introduced me to her wider social circle, and suddenly I had a whole group of people to do things with. I started dating. I'd been too self-conscious about my English to even try before, but now I felt confident enough to go on dates. I met Marcus on a hiking app, and we hit it off immediately. He was patient with me on the rare occasions I still searched for a word, but most of the time, our conversations flowed naturally. I even started a side project, a blog where I wrote about my experience as an immigrant professional in the tech industry. Writing publicly in English was intimidating, but it pushed me to keep improving. I got comments from people all over the world who related to my story, who were going through similar challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful change was internal. I stopped feeling like an outsider. I stopped feeling like I was constantly struggling to keep up or worried about making mistakes. I felt like myself again, the full, complete version of myself, just in a different language. Chapter 9. The Method. Summarized people started asking me how I did it. Co-workers who were learning second languages, friends of friends who were struggling with English, even some of the newer employees at my company who were non-native speakers. They all wanted to know my secret. At first, I didn't know how to explain it. I'd done so many different things, tried so many approaches, but as I reflected on my journey, I realized there were some core principles that had made all the difference. First, immersion, not isolation. I didn't improve by hiding away with textbooks. I improved by throwing myself into real-life situations where I had to use English. Every conversation was practice. Every interaction was a learning opportunity. Second, active use, not passive study. Watching TV and listening to podcasts helped, but only when I actively engaged, shadowing the audio, narrating my own life, forcing myself to think in English rather than translating. Third, consistency over intensity. I didn't have marathon study sessions. Instead, I used English throughout my day, every day. Small, consistent practice added up to massive improvement. Fourth, embracing discomfort. The activities that scared me the most, book club, improv class, speaking up at work, were the ones that pushed me forward the fastest. Growth lives outside the comfort zone. Fifth, real communication over perfection. I stopped worrying so much about making mistakes and focused instead on conveying my meaning. Native speakers make mistakes too. What matters is connection. Sixth, context-based learning. I learned vocabulary and phrases in context, seeing how they were actually used, rather than memorizing definitions. This made the language stick and made it easier to use naturally. Seventh, multiple input sources. I didn't rely on just one method. I combined reading, listening, speaking, and writing. I learned from books, podcasts, conversations, TV shows, and real-life experiences. Each source reinforced the others. Eighth, feedback loops. I sought out feedback constantly, from my manager, from friends, from language tools, even from voice assistants. Every piece of feedback helped me refine my skills. And finally, patience with myself. I had bad days. I had moments where I felt like I wasn't improving at all. But I kept going, trusting the process, and eventually, the progress became undeniable. Chapter 10. Paying it forward by the time fall arrived, I felt like a completely different person than the scared, frustrated woman who had sat in that conference room 6 months earlier. I decided I wanted to help others who were going through what I'd experienced. I started mentoring a new employee at work, Sophia, who had just moved from Brazil. I shared my strategies with her, encouraged her to speak up even when she was nervous, and gave her honest feedback on her communication. Watching her gain confidence over the weeks reminded me of how far I'd come. I also started volunteering as an English conversation partner at the local library. Once a week, I'd meet with immigrants and refugees who were working on their English skills. The irony wasn't lost on me. Less than a year ago, I would have been the one seeking out a conversation partner. Now I was confident enough to help others. The experience was humbling and rewarding. I met people with incredible stories, people who were facing much bigger challenges than I'd ever faced, and yet they kept pushing forward with determination and hope. One woman, Amira, told me after one of our sessions, "You give me hope. If you can do it, maybe I can too." I told her what I wish someone had told me earlier. You absolutely can. It just takes time, practice, and courage. It's been over a year now since that embarrassing moment in the conference room. I'm not going to tell you my English is perfect. It's not. I still make mistakes sometimes. I still encounter words I don't know. I still have moments where I struggle to express exactly what I mean. But here's what's different. I don't let those moments define me anymore. I don't let them stop me from participating, from connecting, from living fully in this language and this country I've made my home. My English improved fast, not because I found some magic trick or secret method. It improved because I stopped treating it like a subject to study and started treating it like a tool to use. A tool for building relationships, for advancing my career, for expressing my thoughts and ideas, for living my life. If you're struggling with English right now, I want you to know that I understand. I've been there. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and sometimes it feels impossible. But it's not impossible. You can do this. Start speaking, even if you're scared. Start using English in real situations, even if you make mistakes. Start thinking of yourself as someone who speaks English, not someone who is trying to learn English. Because the truth is, you don't learn a language by studying it. You learn it by living in it. Your journey will be different from mine. You'll find strategies that work for you. Encounter challenges I never faced, and have breakthroughs in unexpected moments. But if you commit to the process, if you push through the discomfort, if you practice consistently and embrace real communication over perfect grammar, you will improve. Maybe even faster than you think possible. I believe in you, and I can't wait to hear about your own journey. Because here's what I've learned. Improving your English isn't just about language skills. It's about reclaiming your voice, your confidence, and your sense of self. It's about opening doors you thought were closed. It's about connecting with people and opportunities in ways you never imagined. So don't wait. Don't put it off until you feel ready. Start today. Start now. Your future self will thank you. This is Olivia signing off. And remember, you've got this.